Hello, School Transportation Nation. Tony Corpin here with School Transportation News. Glad you made it to the podcast. It's brought to you by TransFinder, the leader in school bus routing software. Later on, Mr. Ryan Gray is going to be talking with Mike Warner, the Associate Director of Fleet Maintenance at Cobb County School District in Georgia. Ryan, I'm excited for that interview.
Absolutely. Mike is one of our 2022 Garage Star profiles. Right now, you can read that article in our August issue at stnonline.com, or, I got my paper version in the mail last week. But yes, definitely very deserving of this honor. We've known Mike for several years now. So he's going to tell us a little bit more about his background and certainly talk about how Cobb County is trying to tackle a host of issues. They just started up school a couple of weeks ago, but he's involved in driver training, and, they're looking at electric vehicles just like everybody else and what that means, tech shortage, supply chain, fuel costs, you name it. He's on top of it.
Oh, all super fun stuff, Ryan. I think everybody is dealing with it. With school startup upon us, it's hot and heavy. You see the stories. People are posting videos, how they're ready to go. I got a really fun video from the Director of Transportation over at Clark County, Jennifer Vobis. Her drivers posted a video on TikTok that was like, "We're ready." It kind of had a cool soundtrack, and they were testing the buses out. So I love the employees and the teams getting hyped up for school startup. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's, everybody's going back to school. My daughter went back to school this week, second grade. I think, Tony, your daughters have another week or two to go. But definitely we're back in the swing of things. Hopefully this year feels a little bit different than it did the year prior, and the year prior to that with COVID. I mean, that's still around, of course. But, it's good to see those buses rolling in force again.
Yeah, I know safety is going to be a big part of that, and we definitely are keeping an eye on that. And there's a lot of safety messages out there, keeping that top of mind as drivers haven't been around school buses. And here we are again. We want to keep an eye out for those loading and unloading zone accidents. We want to keep an eye out for illegal passing. Those are all kind of the big issues. I know we have an article we're working on the upcoming September issue about dragging, right? So kind of those big safety issues where students are getting caught in the doors and then driver drives off, not paying attention, and technologies and things like that. So always very top of mind with kind of the safety topics that we're covering and keeping top of mind for you guys out in the School Transportation Nation. We want to be sure you have a safe and prosperous start to school startup. And it's always important to kind of keep safety top of mind. But I know, Ryan, we had a lot of big news that came out this last week. We had some earnings reports from Bluebird talking about kind of the supply chain headwinds. So you want to kind of dive a little deeper into that?
Yeah, so it comes as no surprise. Everybody's dealing with this. I think Bluebird calls it their recovery plan. They're still kind of digging out from the supply chain issues. We've talked about it before. They have raised their prices by 25% year over year to try to, I think, recoup some of their own costs. I know that, I've talked with a lot of school districts, not just Bluebird customers, that are seeing price increases amid delays in receiving their orders, a lot of canceled orders out there right now. So certainly the OEMs have taken a hit recently, and it's really just kind of trying to position themselves for the future. I think that everyone agrees that we're not out of the woods yet on the supply chain issues. I've read some things recently where it's starting to alleviate a little bit, and Mike Warner talks about that in a little bit when we have his interview, and he talks about how he's sensing that that's starting to alleviate a little bit. But he's been pretty lucky, and he'll talk about how about the longest they've waited for new bus orders is about 9 months. Other people that I've talked to are a year and a half, sometimes 2 years. So definitely, the sales, the appetite for sales, I should say, is out there. School districts have money to spend on new buses. They want new buses, but definitely getting those buses has been a challenge. I have an article up about Zoom the heretofore transportation network company that is now a school bus contractor, especially out here in California. They have the contracts up in San Francisco and Oakland, and recently won the bid in LA Unified. Huge win for that company. They had an order for over 400 new propane Visions from Bluebird, and their dealer they just couldn't satisfy it. The buses were not there. So, I think we've talked about it recently talked last week with John McKinney at Midwest Transit Equipment, where dealers are having to get creative, a lot of collaboration. Folks need these vehicles. So there's a lot of work being done to share assets, to move things around so that we actually have buses to transport the kids.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, Ryan, to see how it all plays out. A lot of the new companies coming to the market. And, as John McKinney basically said, people got to compromise, right? If they need that larger vehicle, 70 plus passenger, maybe only that 66 passengers available. And this is all they've got. So take it or leave it. Or you just have to extend the life of those existing vehicles that you have. And, maybe that means more parts, more service, and that only amplifies that technician shortage we've been talking about. So the need for technicians is even more important, because now we're extending the life of the vehicle by 2 or 3 years instead of people staying on that normal replacement cycle that they would have been on. So yeah, a lot happening in those aspects. I know in the earnings report Bluebird had, they obviously are citing the Clean School Bus Act funding, and the end of the day, everybody is kind of waiting to see, hey, are they going to get awarded? The name's going to get pulled out of the hat of that $500 million so they can start allocating POs, which, I don't think we're really going to know that till October, maybe mid-October, at least according to what EPA has said. And I know that deadline's coming up here the 19th of August. So if you guys haven't pulled the trigger yet, can't wait much longer. Get on that sam.gov page, create it, apply for some of that clean school bus funding. But the OEMs are definitely citing that as something on the horizon. I know Lion Electric also came out with their earnings and talked a little bit about where they were headed, as well as they've had quite a few notable politicians kind of highlighting their new manufacturing facility that they have in Joliet, Illinois, that they're trying to get up and running as the largest alternative energy commercial vehicle manufacturing facility in the United States. So it'll be very interesting to see kind of that come together. I know they had a pretty aggressive timeline of trying to get that out and rolling by the end of the year. I'm not sure it'll be there, but with supply chain, I'm sure that'll slow the process a bit. But a lot of hype, a lot of energy around that, Ryan.
Yep. Well, and talking about the supply chain, so making news last week was President Joe Biden signed into law the Chips and Science Act of 2022. So that was passed by Congress earlier this summer. And that's really trying to spur along U.S. manufacturing. I mean, that's exactly the point you're talking about. And I caught up with Lion and I asked them about that. And, they essentially said, hey, this is going to incentivize chip manufacturing, which we all know has been a big, clog in the supply chain. Vehicle manufacturers are starved for these chips. And so Lion told me, hey, this is ideal for us because we're going to be building buses here. More suppliers on the market is always a positive thing, and more competition means more competitive pricing. And that's, of course, good news to all the student transportation consumers out there, school districts, bus companies, especially when you're talking about these electric buses, $375,000 a pop, not including another 25 to 40 grand, say, for the infrastructure. So the current administration is really, earmarking manufacturing and trying to counter China. I mean, we're trying to stay competitive. We know, especially when you're talking about electric vehicles, China owns electric vehicle production global. I mean, they have the raw materials that are necessary to build the batteries. And, the U.S. is behind, and a lot has to be done. So they're throwing, a couple $100 billion towards this. So it'll be really interesting to see over the coming years how this moves the needle.
Yeah, a couple other interesting things happening out there in the Type A market, right? We know chassis are very tight, and John McKinney, again, last week had mentioned it with Ford and GM building Type A vehicles, which would be, like Rev Group, Microbird, in the commercial markets like Forest River, right? The Ford and GM just simply aren't allocating the traditional gas or diesel chassis. So I'm curious to see maybe the advent of more integrated EV based chassis. I know IC Bus had tried to launch one many years ago, and maybe it was just before its time, but I would not be surprised if we start seeing more and more of the manufacturers build their own chassis, simply because the cost of chassis is also going way up. So maybe that cost variance of making your own integrated chassis, which is more expensive, that variance, that valley starts to shorten up and it becomes a lot more economically viable. So I'm betting we're going to start to see more of that in the future in the Type A school bus market, which will be an interesting shift, especially as we get the more EVs on the road, which that kind of goes hand in hand, in my opinion, Ryan.
Oh, well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you already have it, we have Lion has it's a transit bus, but it's that smaller vehicle. Green Power just came out with an integrated Type A.
Yeah, the Nano Beast.
Yeah, the Nano Beast.
So actually won one of our innovation awards as well at STN Expo.
Absolutely. And we're seeing, what new manufacturer Pegasus Specialty Vehicles out of Ohio, what they're doing with Zeus. That's a cool looking machine. So it's not quite integrated, but yet the point here is going beyond the traditional Ford and GM for that chassis. We're seeing what, Lightning Motors is doing, Motive. So there's additional chassis out there, especially in the EV space. And as Mike Warner talks about later, he says, it's not if, it's when. Electric buses are coming. Everyone's going to eventually have them. It's going to take a while, yes, and there's a lot that needs to be figured out with them. But certainly the trend is going toward that integrated chassis body built from the ground up, purpose built, if you will. And at least, in the interim, seeing a lot of additional new, non-traditional, at least, chassis for the school bus market that are now available and are actually putting vehicles out on the road.
Yeah, and I know also, Ryan, BYD, who's a relatively new entrant to the market, is actually launching their Type A bus at the Transporting Students with Disabilities Conference in November at our trade show on November 10th and 11th. That'll be there. So brand new for the whole industry to see, a fully integrated BYD Type A school bus. And I've been hearing rumors on the street that it's a really cool vehicle, really exciting to see all the new manufacturers in this market bringing their A game. And again, there's another EV Type A, just like you said. So I think this trend is going to continue, and we're going to see more and more of it. And it will hopefully help alleviate some of the chassis heartburn that the manufacturers are feeling, because, it's scary because you got all these surcharges and increased prices, and the order that you put in today that comes 2 years from now, or 18 months or 12 months or whatever it is, God, there's probably going to be 5 price increases between then and now. And then, how do school districts budget for unexpected variable costs in manufacturing? Because it's coming. And I don't, maybe it's going to taper out, but as John McKinney said last week, he says, yeah, maybe we're going to see it in 23. And you even said, hey, maybe even to 24. So it's just, that's on the table, man. And I don't think it's going to change. The pain is still out there.
I think there's a couple things there and I'd say no, not yet, because it's just not ready. But the challenge for those integrated Type A chassis body manufacturers are, there's 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 Type A's in a good year that need to be produced to satisfy demand. When is that tipping point going to happen where everybody jumps on board and can fulfill that? Of course, that's, time will tell. But also, too, something, alluding back to what John McKinney said last week, is that districts really need to get out in front of this. He and a lot of people said, hey, whether or not the supply chain starts to loosen up, or I think we're seeing the realization going forward that there's always going to be some kind of supply chain, kind of like COVID. I mean, there's always going to be something. It's never going to just solve itself. The driver shortage, the tech shortage. I mean, these are long-term issues to grapple with. And districts really need to start, looking at their buying cycle. Their traditional purchasing cycle, I think, is going out the window. And that requires them to get their school boards on board, their superintendents, and they need to be saying, hey, this is not just an aberration. This is something that we need to look at and have a long-term strategy. Maybe we need to shift our buying culture, that traditional model of specifying buses. Maybe we need to move that up 6 months. We need to address these supply shortages and make sure that we do everything we can to be proactive to ensure that we have buses when we need them.
Yeah, and I think, again, dynamic pricing models, right? We're seeing that shift in the market from OEMs too, where there's this kind of longer fixed price, but also this variable price model, right? So yeah, I agree with you completely, Ryan. I think it's definitely a pivotal moment in the school transportation industry where we're going to need to really shift our mindset on how things are purchased and how they're budgeted. You may end up having to get one or two less buses simply because the price has changed so many times before you actually take delivery that there's going to be sacrifices, and you have to kind of manage expectations on what the outcomes are going to be. And it's a real realistic thing, in my opinion. So I really think that's kind of the future of purchasing. Maybe something we talk about at a future conference. Definitely, I think a hot topic, no doubt, Ryan.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of conferences, you mentioned it earlier. The next one we've got coming up is TSD Conference, November 8th through the 13th. You want to head over to tsdconference.com. We have an agenda at a glance up. We got some topics. We got our unique experiences. Stay tuned. Bookmark that page because things are changing almost daily, Tony. Things are flying at warp speed right now. Got a lot planned, a lot that's getting planned. We'll be trickling out some information over the coming weeks. We have the early bird deal coming up, so head over to tsdconference.com and start satiating your appetite and planning for the fall.
Yeah, they can still save that $100, Ryan, with that early bird. And then our agenda's up, as you mentioned, been working on it. So excited for that. And guys, there are so many suppliers that you've probably seen over the summer, and TransFinder is one of those guys. You're definitely bumping them at the TSD conference. And these guys have been crisscrossing the country over the summer, getting you guys ready for school startup. They have an award-winning solution that brings safety and savings to any district that they work with. TransFinder has an amazing product, a complete transportation solution called the Trifecta. That's Route Finder Plus, the browser-based solution, Wayfinder, TransFinder's innovative driver app, and Stop Finder, the leading parent app. And their product Plus is now more than 2 years old, has proprietary artificial intelligence optimization baked into it, as well as tools like Form Finder and Chat Finder. Guys, if you're not attending the TSD show or one of the summer conferences, don't worry. You guys can still catch up with the guys at TransFinder and learn more about that Trifecta solution. Reach out to them and email getplus@transfinder.com or give them a call at 800-373-3609 to learn more. All right, Ryan and Mike Warner are talking next. Take it away, guys.
We are now joined by Mike Warner, the Associate Director of Fleet Maintenance for Cobb County School District in Georgia. Mike, good to see you again. How's it going?
Good to see you, Ryan. Everything's going as well as possible at the beginning of the school year.
Absolutely. So you guys started a couple of weeks ago, August 1st, right?
That is correct.
Okay, well, we're going to get into that here in a second, but it's good to see Mike. We've worked together a few times over the years. He's been out to STN Expo Reno. He presented on his fleet expertise. He was actually part of our virtual conference during COVID with our TSD conference. So, Mike, let's just jump right into it. First of all, though, before we get to the nuts and bolts, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself. How long have you been in the industry? How did you get involved with school bus maintenance?
So I've been with Cobb County Schools since 2007. So I'm going into my 16th year. Kind of unique situation. I've been in the trucking industry since I came out of the military in '89 and moved around between trailers and trucks and different things, and was working for a freight company locally. And some of the guys that work at the bus shop were moonlighting, fueling trucks and stuff. And they kept saying, you need to come over with us. You need to come over with us. And I was a supervisor. And I'm like, I don't know, school buses, that's weird. But so I applied. And I was actually applying for a shop supervisor. And unfortunately, fortunately for whoever, my predecessor had passed away in the meantime. So they asked me, would you be interested in applying for the director job? And I was like, sure, why not? So I was given the opportunity to take it on in 2007. So that's how I came into school buses. Being in the trucking, school buses are a truck. We just carry different cargo. So I've had to really have the experience to bring it into the shops, but running 4 shops, I had that experience in previous jobs. So having multiple locations. So it kind of worked well having the 4 locations, but didn't know I was getting into a 1,500, 1,600 vehicle fleet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've been growing and we're still continuing to grow. But learning school buses, the safety issues, the safety equipment, there's a lot more than what people know that's on a school bus that's not, that's not on a truck. So I've been 15 years, and I think my biggest goal that I've tried to accomplish is, on time, safe for the equipment and the students. Just look at it. We brought a lot of technology in over the last 15 years. For some reason, I guess age or whatever it is, I was the one that they came to. So when we started dealing with stop arm cameras, that came into me. Push to talk back in the Nextel days, I got involved in that. GPS. Now we're with MDTs with a vendor. Routing. I've changed all of our software to being paperless. Even just a driver inspection report is now paperless. So it's just all this stuff I'm involved in. And like I had mentioned coming into this podcast I just finished up teaching a class of 15 new drivers. So it's it's a whole different world. In trucking, it was about truck going from, Marietta, Georgia to Dallas, Texas and back. And they carried a whole bunch of boxes. Here it's about that 20-minute ride for the students. And I'm worried about, did the parent get the notification from, here comes the bus out. So, and then turn around 5 minutes later, I'm dealing with, I need to replace, an engine in a bus. So it's been very unique and it's a challenge. And I've enjoyed it for 15 years. So that's a little about me and what I do every day.
The many hats of day-to-day of a fleet director. Appreciate that. And you hit the nail on the head there. We were talking about growing districts. Obviously, you guys either in Cobb County are Atlanta adjacent, really. So obviously a big metropolitan area. Now, for the most part in Georgia, the school districts are county school districts. So you mentioned those 20-minute rides. Probably there's a lot longer rides though for a lot of the kids if you're depending on if you're going cross county, especially with special needs students. It's really important to have the buses up to snuff and to make sure that there's no breakdowns and whatnot, especially with those students.
Exactly. And those special needs is a big program. I believe we are one of the larger ones in Georgia, Metro Atlanta, even to the point I've heard that a lot of parents with special needs will move to Cobb School District just because of the service and what we afford to special needs students. Mm-hmm. And we do have those every year, more and more magnet specialty runs. So, some of those buses are now running an hour and 15 minutes in traffic, to which, again, we now are making sure that buses have air conditioning. That was something that even in Georgia, that was not a big thing for a regular route bus was air conditioning. Now everything we buy has air conditioning. So, it just puts more onto my staff to maintain and keeping those buses running because who wants to drive a bus that has air conditioning that doesn't work? So
absolutely. Yeah.
So we do have a lot of long runs as well.
Yeah. So were those really driven by IEPs that there was enough students that, their IEPs called for something like an air conditioning bus? And then where do you make a decision as a district, especially a very large district like Cobb County, to say, hey, we're going to go ahead and put them all on the bus? You mentioned, obviously, there's the driver comfort. We're very big into retention right now, doing all we can for staff because everyone's so hard to come by. Did that play into that decision for air conditioning?
I think it did. When I started here in 2007, we didn't have any regular ed buses with air conditioning on them. We had about half of our special needs buses had air conditioning. They were still buying buses at that time, or the previous order to me starting. They ordered some buses with lift and air conditioning, and then they ordered some buses without lift with air conditioning. And now, since 2009, talking with my previous director, we went towards the direction that it's going to be easier. Let's just go ahead and make it, we call it a multi-function bus or multi-purpose. Everything at that point became a lift AC bus in the special needs department because we seen the direction. It was obvious. My kid is not going to ride on a hot bus in special needs. And because of the laws and the IEPs and what doctors would write, we just started seeing that growing and growing and growing. So they were having a difficult time, having enough air conditioning buses or wheelchairs. So now we spec everything. I spec every bus out with a wheelchair and air conditioning, even though there might be kids on that route that don't need it, a wheelchair, or they don't have an IEP saying they need AC. So, and then now our board has also said that our new policy is everything we buy, even in regular ed going forward, will have air conditioning as well. So it's just the day and age. I mean, things have changed. When we were young, I think I just told the new class, when we were young, I mean, your air conditioning was 2 of 55, and now today, I mean, parents can't believe that you would have them ride on a bus for 20 minutes with no air conditioning. So, we've had to adapt to it, and we'll work through it. It's definitely a change in society today.
Absolutely. Another big change that I know is a regulation there, part of the spec there in the state of Georgia is, speaking of special ed buses, they all have to have fire suppression systems, correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. So
I think that took over, we did it in 2003, and that was part of, I think, the one panel that I did through the virtual
CSD,
was on that. And, there's some mixed feelings there. I've learned a lot about it. I just recently was talking to another district. They didn't realize that you should have them inspected annually. And I'm like, yeah, you have to inspect those. Well, we do. We look at them. We make sure they're charged up. No. They've got to be certified just like a fire extinguisher. So, it's a big expense. But during that panel, it was kind of surprising the number of states that don't require it now, not only on special needs. First off, because of wheelchair students, how long it would take to get them off and stuff. I think there's really a push going from, I believe it was the Iowa file, that, even in the regular ed, that might be something we're seeing in the future. And I can see pros and cons to it. I've seen buses catch on fire and the damage they do, just from a little electrical spark or something. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's something we don't want to play with. And I think that fire suppression is something I think it's important. I think that, in my opinion, is something, if it's maintained, it doesn't cost you a lot of money. But you don't maintain it, it'll cost a whole lot of money.
Absolutely. A lot of misconceptions about that. I know when we ask the question, a lot of people say, oh, yeah, we have fire suppression systems. And you do a little bit deeper digging and you find out they're talking about the fire extinguisher and they don't know the difference between the two.
Right.
And now you have electric buses coming, and we have an article out right now in our August issue that's talking about electric fires and lithium ion batteries. And that's a whole nother beast. So I want to talk a little bit about electric buses real quickly. Obviously, you're directing the maintenance district wide there. In terms of training, I mean, electric buses are coming. I think there's the first electric buses in Georgia. I don't think you guys have them yet, but certainly there's all this money right now that the EPA is throwing at electric or propane, really is where we're seeing the thrust of that money going to. But, what are your thoughts? Are you thinking, hey, it's coming, especially things the EPA is doing right now, targeting further, NOx reductions on diesel engines? Is electric going to be here? And what do we as an industry have to do to prepare our fleet technicians to be able to work on them?
For us here in Cobb, and I work real close with my director, and we've talked numerous times. We've gone through, done a lot of reading, a lot of research. I was able to go to a couple of conferences, and ironically enough, my fleet software in the conference in California back a few months ago, that I got to spend some time with a couple of directors from California that are going through this, not just necessarily in the bus, but also in the government sector. And seeing and listening to them, and I had a lot of ideas, and just reading you guys' magazine, I get a lot of reports and a lot of information, and then our trade show or our local conferences and stuff. And it was like, okay, it really opened my eyes. I know we're going there. And I told people, I said, there's no around it. I mean, it's not, if you're ever going to go electric, it's when. And I come back with some good information from that conference, because they give me some ideas that you never thought about. Like, can your real estate handle it? Because it's going to take more space to charge buses. A lot of people don't look at that. You can't have just any Joe mechanic or technician work on it. We're talking about, this is high voltage. You're going to have to take existing technicians for school buses and train them, send them out to be trained. I talked to one of the vendors yesterday, and for example, he said that all of their technicians that work on EV, they are required to go to a training within their company in Chicago for an extended period of time just to be able to be trained to even think about working on the bus, not even on the battery side. That's a whole different thing. So there's a lot more there. And so talking with my district and the people that I work with on this and making that decision, I know it's coming. I know it's probably going to be here before I retire. But yeah, I'd love to be the one like Metro County that's next to me. They've already got one, but they already found out there's a lot of R&D. There's a lot of stuff that they've got to do, be prepared. Yeah, it's going to be easy to throw one bus out there with a charger, and just say run it out there just to show the politics of it or just the media and get that attention. But, to go out there and think, okay, I'm going to electrify and put a fleet of 1,000 buses and I'm going to get half of them in electric. How many chargers are we talking? Where are you going to charge all these at? Well, my yards ain't going to handle it. So you're going to have to do it at a school. What routes can they do? And there's so much that we don't know. If you went out and bought a Tesla 5 years ago, they're still learning today what those vehicles can do. What a battery life then was 100 miles, they're finding out they can get 400 miles because the way they do the braking and everything else. So there's so much with EV, and I'm working with a local utility. We're in a disadvantage, or if you want to call it that, we have 3 different utilities within our county alone. So with all the schools, the shops, and everything else, we would be dealing with 3 different utility companies. So that makes it a whole different thing. So you're talking about, big to grid and things like that. You're dealing, depends on where that bus is at. So the size of route, the distance they can travel. What are you going to do about field trips? So there's all these different things that we've got to work out until everybody kind of puts their head together and comes up with a plan and saying, hey, this is where we want to be at in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and start working to develop that. And we're working on that. One of the things was the EPA money, the clean air money that's out there. We did apply for $500,000 towards it. We had the conversation. Do we want to try to throw a 1 or 2 EV buses in there, see where that kind of takes us and start getting into it? And the decision was, no, let's get our infrastructure in place before we start talking about throwing a bunch of buses out there and then try to figure it out from there. So you do the infrastructure, then get the bus, don't get the bus, then the infrastructure. So that was one thing that I had, especially the guys from California. They were like, that's the worst thing you can do is get the vehicle first. So we are concentrating, and we did apply for the $500,000 in funding from the clean air money going towards propane.
And how many propanes do you have already in your fleet?
So I'm at about 120 propane buses out of 1,000 buses. And we've got 35 on order as we speak that'll be here in another 30, 60 days. And we're working towards some local bond here in Georgia. Fortunately, we have a good legislator. It's a really big push with buses and safety initiatives. And they allotted, I think it was $153 million in bond money, so which is supposed to be for the next 3 years. But for us, the way it's panned out with all the formulas and everything, it gives us 59 buses. So we're working towards putting together an order on 59 propane buses that we'll probably see shortly after the first of the year.
Soon, over 20% of your fleet will be propane over the,
Correct.
Probably okay. So talking about electric buses and the tech shortage, obviously, and I want to talk about, what your numbers are in your 4 shops, but are you also looking at, or maybe hearing from, your circle, or, perhaps any applicants that are coming across your desk that they maybe are interested in EV? Is that maybe a selling point for the industry going forward, that they're going to have these different buses, these, more high-tech buses to attract kind of the next generation of staff?
So we'll start with, I have 48 technicians that are anywhere from a lead mechanic all the way down to a helper. So what I call anybody that can turn a wrench, and then 7 office staff. So out of 48 technicians that I have, or positions, I also not only do 4 bus shops, but I also have a 4-bay body shop. So I currently, out of the 48 positions, I am short 4 technicians, 2 body shop, and 1 helper. So I'm short 7 of 48 positions right now. I've been here for 15 years. The most I've ever been short at one time was 2. So I'm looking, and I've had these positions, some of them open for almost a year. And a lot of it is pay. A lot of it is just looking at what we do and what we work on. But we just don't get applications. And if you do get them, then it's, we're in a different world. You can't because you have to have a CDL. So, and I'm sorry, but sometimes in the technician fields, some of them can't pass, drug tests and stuff. So we're a little more critical because even, we're in the shop, you can't have any kind of criminal history. So you start eliminating a lot of people that way. And it's surprising, but yeah. So it's been a struggle. I've been working with our HR. We have our internal ways of putting the information out. We've had it out on Indeed and stuff. There was a new site called Best Time that I think they do a lot of classified type jobs. So we've reached out and they've been posting it there. So we're seeing some resumes come in through that. I've been working again with the schools, looking at a couple of the magnet programs that we have that are automotive to see if there's something we can do there to maybe bring in some interns. I've been working with a couple local community colleges. Our standard's always been in the past at minimum 2 years of experience working in automotive, whether it be cars or diesel. I'm having to step back and going, maybe it's worth looking at them coming right out of school with a certificate. You're taking the chance of somebody with no experience, but they got the knowledge, the book knowledge, try to get a hands-on, let them see that, you start with a government school district and, in 25, 30 years, you can walk out of here with a pretty good little pension if that happens to be the position you're in. So I think there's always been that, because I tell you honestly, when I applied in '07, I don't think, even when I came out of the military, I never thought about going to work for a school district. You think school district, you think this teachers. And even the school district thinks it's teachers. But we have so many jobs that support the school districts, and plumbers and electricians and landscapers and technicians for buses. And so I think it's getting that word out is the hardest thing to get people to understand that there's other jobs. We have a drawback in Georgia. We work under the opportunity is there in the higher level positions, like the teachers of the teachers retirement system. So, it makes a pretty nice draw to go into a place where you're going to get a nice pension in, 20, 30 years, where my technicians don't fall under that right now. So it's hard to pull a guy in that's on a 401k in a dealership making $100,000 a year to say, hey, you come over here and make 60, but I don't have no retirement. It's kind of a draw. And so we're trying to overcome that. We're working hard again. We were close to getting teacher retirement for all the technicians when COVID happened. And of course, nasty old COVID messed everything up. So now we're backstepping and we're going back through it. Now budgets are rolling. Of course, money's tight and inflation. And, is it more important to give everybody raises versus giving technicians, teacher retirement? I mean, there's decisions not I make. I would give it to them a long time ago, but higher ups have got to look at it. And for 48 employees, it's a pretty substantial amount of money that district would be up to. So that's our biggest dilemma with technicians and getting them is to get them to apply first. I had one that I was bringing from the dealership. It was a driver's husband. He went through all the steps, interviewed, going to go. And he got to the point of get signed on or do all of his fingerprint and everything. Emailed me and said, sorry, I can't take the job. He goes, they offered me $20,000 more a year to stay where I'm at. So, there's that battle going on with people. So it's going to take a little while, but we're making it. We've got I feel like I've got a good staff. We've got some good automotive people. We've got some good diesel technicians. I've talked to some of them about the interest of the EV side. Some of the younger guys, I think there's a couple of them that would be interested if there was like a manufacturer training class, something where we could send them to. They would be good candidates because they would understand that stuff. You get some of these old timers that have been working on, the old diesel engines for the last 25, 30 years. They're scared to death of of electric vehicles. So we'll work through that, and that'll be part of that infrastructure would be setting up and sending people to training and working on that. And again, it's going to be something that's going to happen over years. So it's not like tomorrow I've got to have somebody work on an electric bus. So we'll see it, because even if we ordered it today, we're probably talking a year before we see it.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of where we're at. And like I said, so no, it's not a no on EV. It's just not yet. And like I said, I'm 56. I've got a few years to work. I'll see them before I retire. There's no doubt. But I want to work smarter ahead of time and do our homework and not just jump into something and then dump it off going, because we had one district here local, did that a few years ago. And from my understanding, they have 2 electric early ons, and they never even ran a route yet. So don't want to be that person.
Doesn't do you much good. Yeah, exactly. Well, last but certainly not least, and you just alluded to it, who knows when you could see some of these new orders, the supply chain disruptions. We got fuel costs, although the fuel costs have been getting better over the last several weeks. What are you looking at in terms of your new bus orders? I'm hearing, horror stories from across the nation of folks that are, they ordered, a year ago, 6 months ago. They're being told, it's going to be another year. It's going to be 2024. What are you seeing in terms of your new bus orders and them arriving?
One manufacturer, I ordered 25 buses, and they were 72 passenger propanes. They were ordered in November, and we're going to get them in September.
It's almost a year.
I ordered in February, I ordered 10 from another manufacturer, and I'll be getting those in October.
Okay.
So it's there. I don't think it's quite as bad as what it was. We've had orders that did take 9 months. Our problem now is not so much the getting the buses in and getting them delivered, but once we PDI them and before we put them in service, we inspect them and check them over. We find anything that are manufacturer defects, and before we even do anything to them, install our equipment. And so, like the last order, I have still waiting out of 12 buses. I've gotten 5 of them. They were delivered in early July, and I'm putting 5 of the 12 on the road because they can't get parts for the other ones.
Yeah.
So, and then that carries over into the parts, and we have an in-house parts store, integrated business services, what they call it. Right now, for example, everybody knows about diesel engines and the diesel exhaust fluid and the diesel heads. The DEF heads has become impossible. I have 25 buses down right now waiting just for that one part. And that's a part that won't let the bus run.
Yeah.
So, it's hurting us. And so I've got a lot of buses that are out of service. Drivers are upset because it's new buses that are, whether under warranty or even out of warranty, but they want to be in their new buses, but they're driving a 20-year-old bus because we can't get parts. So it's definitely been a hassle. I'll give an example: foams for seat backs. Once they break down, we have to replace them. We've never really had a big problem, but here in the last few years, we're noticing them breaking down on the seats, the seat backs, and so we were ordering new seat foams, and all of a sudden nobody could get them. And I'm like, I got to get these buses back on the road. So we went and did some searching on our own, found a guy up in Michigan that had some of these seat covers. Of course, he knew what he had because he was able to sell them to us for twice as much as what we were paying for them.
Yeah.
So, but I had no choice. I have to get the buses back on the road. I mean, there's an expense there. It's a safety issue. I can't run the bus, and I need the bus back on the road. So I had no choice but to order them. And so, that's an impact to me and to my budget and to the district. And so now I've got to look at down the road. That's an extra $2,000 I spent on, seat foams that I'm going to have to make up somewhere down the road. And my district's good about, like last year, a lot of the parts increased anywhere from 27 to 37%. And so my budget didn't account for it. And I was like, I got to have more money. They're like, you do what you got to do to get the buses on the road. So, they understand that. They understand it's beyond our control. I handle the fuel for the district, and I monitor it on a daily basis. We purchase under a co-op, and we're getting the best pricing we can. But, like you and your pocketbook, there's no control about what you're paying. And we can try to conserve and be careful as much as we can, but we got to buy the fuel. So we did exceed in both the fuel budget and the parts and repair budget last year. But it wasn't like I got chewed out or anything because they've seen it, and I kept them informed going into it when, early last year before we started seeing issues, and they were able to understand it and prepare for it. Fortunately, we're in a decent county, and I'm not saying they got a lot of money, but they are very frugal and they're very careful. And we do have the Atlanta Braves Stadium in our county, so that sure helps our revenues. So,
yes.
So there's a lot of things that makes it positive. And like I said, it's been a great place, and I've enjoyed working here. Like I said, 15 going on 16 years, and there's been changes just in the time I've been here, and it's just continued changing. But, if anybody was not in the school bus industry listening to this podcast, I would say don't count out working in school bus transportation, because if you want a challenge, every day can be a challenge if you make it. I don't care if you're a bus driver, a technician, a director, or a superintendent. I see it all across the board, even the school teachers, custodians. I worked in trucking. It got boring. Mm-hmm. This don't get boring.
Yeah. Or, being an editor-in-chief of a School Bus Magazine, for that matter, putting together conferences. It definitely is not boring.
Exactly.
Well, thanks so much, Mike. It's great to catch up with you. Looking forward to, hopefully getting you out to one of our conferences coming up. I know you're busy. You guys just started school a couple weeks ago. You have a lot of training to do, a lot of figuring out of stuff. So I'll let you get back to it. Thanks so much.
I appreciate it.
Hey, great interview, Ryan. Mike, thank you so much for coming on. Special thanks to our friends at TransFinder for sponsoring this episode. Guys, don't forget, register for the TSD conference November 8th through the 13th. Lock in that early bird rate, save $100. You can also visit scnonline.com. Check out our latest August edition, as well as all things happening in the school transportation industry, the latest news, trends, earnings reports. We got it all. Check that out. And guys, if you love the podcast, share it on social media. Get it out in your network, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, everywhere. Spread the word about the School Transportation Nation. Guys, we're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to pods. We appreciate you, Nation. We love you. We'll see you next week.